My son-in-law called the police to kick me out of my caravan and sold it without my permission. But when they arrived, I was sipping lukewarm tea when I heard the knock. Not the kind you hear from family or neighbors. Soft, rhythmic. No, this one was firm, official, intentional. I did not even have to turn my head to know who had called them. My bones felt it before my ears caught the command. "Ma'am." The voice was male, clipped, polite in a way that always precedes cruelty. "We need to ask you to step out of the vehicle." Vehicle. They never called it what it was. Not a home, just a piece of metal parked on their land. Just a vehicle. I opened the door of the caravan slowly, letting the late autumn air touch the back of my neck. My knees protested as I stepped down, but I smiled gently at the officer. Two of them were standing in the driveway, hands on their hips. Behind them, Steve was already talking. "She cannot see well," he said, arms crossed. "She ran over the sprinkler last week, parked halfway onto the neighbor's lawn. I am worried about her. We are just trying to keep her safe." Steve had a voice like gravel, soaked in bleach, scratched, harsh, and never natural. He used words like "we" as if Marlene had any say in what he decided. My daughter stood beside him, quiet, eyes down. I saw the folded arms, the forced frown, the little shake of the head that always followed whenever she tried to pretend she was not part of something. "I understand, sir," the officer nodded. "Ma'am, we have received a safety report. We are required to ask you to step out of the RV for inspection. You will not be removed, just a temporary check to ensure everything is in order." That is when Steve took a step forward, not toward the police, but toward me. "It has already been sold anyway," he announced like it was a blessing. "The buyer is on the way. We found a good place for you, Mom. A senior living community with meals and nurses and exercise classes. No more struggling with the toilet or trying to fix the heater when it cuts out. It is what you need." The way he said, "what you need," made me feel like a cracked teacup. Someone was pretending to save before tossing it into the trash. I did not speak. What was there to say? I looked at the officers, nodded once, then stepped back into my home, my caravan, my Clement's last gift to me. I reached for the wooden box that always sat beneath the window seat, untouched unless I needed comfort. My fingers brushed over the lid, and I picked it up, light as ever, though heavy with memory. Inside was the cloth-wrapped canvas, his last sketch. He hadn't even signed it, but I knew it was him. I knew because I had watched him draw the outline with shaking hands days before he collapsed in the garden. I stepped outside and stood quietly by the porch stairs of the main house, the box hugged tight against my chest. The officers began inspecting the caravan while Steve stood tall, hands on his hips, like he had conquered something. One officer leaned in through the caravan window. "No sign of fire hazards. Everything's functional. Pretty tidy, actually. Did you check the brakes and the power system? Last time it blew the fuse in our house. I don't think she even understands the danger she's in." I turned to Marlene. My voice was low, gentle, the way I used to speak to her when she cried as a child after nightmares. "Why now?" Her mouth quivered. "It's for your own good, Mom. You need help. You don't even drive anymore. The insurance is too much and you don't really live in it." And I looked down at the canvas box, at the dirt stains on my shoes, and at the way her wedding ring sparkled under the porch light, while mine had been tucked away since the funeral. "You don't know where I live or what this place means." Steve let out a sigh. "We are not doing this out of spite. We're thinking long term. You always say you don't want to be a burden, right? So let us take care of things now before it gets worse." That was Steve, always a favor disguised as a knife. The other officer stepped down from the caravan holding a clipboard. Ma'am, can you provide ownership documents? Title of registration? I nodded slowly. It's in the house and the old safe behind the pantry. I'll get it. Steve's face twitched, just a flicker. He hadn't expected me to know where the title was. He followed me in uninvited as I opened the creaky cabinet door. The safe was rusted, but intact. I turned the combination slowly, the same one Clement had set, his military ID number. Inside was the envelope, neatly labeled. I handed it to the officer without looking at Steve. Registered owner, Geneva May Belmont. The officer read aloud. No co-owners, no power of attorney transfers on file. And he flipped the page. No recent sales reported. Steve coughed. She's probably mistaken. We signed the sale last week, right, Geneva? I met his eyes. You forged my name. The silence that followed was thick enough to hear the wind shift. The officers looked at each other. We will need to report this. Until this is resolved, the vehicle cannot be sold, removed, or occupied by anyone other than the registered owner. Steve's voice jumped an octave. You have no idea what she's like. She talks to herself. She burns food. She could die in that thing and no one would know. I stood quietly. You already made up your mind. Long before this morning. You just needed a reason. He scoffed. You really think clinging to a rust bucket and a dead man's sketch makes you noble? No, I said. It reminds me what love was before it got buried under signatures and shame. I turned my back to them and walked back to the caravan. The officer held the door for me. Inside, I placed the box gently back in its place. The seat creaked under me as I sat. Steve stood outside, still pacing, still barking at his wife, at the officer, at the world. But inside, it was quiet again, just like it used to be. I remember the day we bought it, Clement and I. A gray afternoon in late March, the kind of afternoon that leaves the air heavy with old rain and second thoughts. But we had no second thoughts. We walked across the gravel lot like children choosing a puppy. He stopped in front of it, a weathered, soft blue Airstream, the kind that looked more like it belonged to a love letter than a parking space. This is the one, he whispered. We will take our last ride in this, Geneva. Just you and me. We won't belong to a place anymore. We will belong to each other. 20 years of saving. That's how long it took. 1 week after our mortgage was paid off, I had worked nights at the county clinic. He had sold war illustrations and painted barns on commission. We never vacationed, never bought new clothes, but we had that dream, a dream in aluminum and steel and freedom. Clement was never loud. He never raised his voice, but when he talked about the road, his voice thickened with something, hope, maybe, or the memory of when life felt young enough to still surprise you. He said the road was the only place where his lungs ever felt full. We drove at first to the Blue Ridge just for a weekend. We parked by a trailhead and spent 2 days drinking instant coffee and reading in silence. The only sound was the soft scratching of his pencil and sketchpad. He always drew when he was calm. He drew me a lot. Sometimes I wondered if he was trying to memorize me before life erased my edges. Years passed, and we took it everywhere. Little places, mostly. Farmers markets, state parks, small towns with no hotels, but hearts big enough to welcome strangers. He never needed much, just his sketchbook, good coffee, and my hand nearby. He started coughing more around his 68th birthday. The doctor said it was just H, maybe dust. But one morning, as he crouched near the small table in the caravan, drawing the silhouette of a pine tree through the window, he fell forward, pencil still in his grip. I held him as he struggled to breathe, his eyes wide with something more than fear. He passed before the ambulance arrived. I did not cry that night. I just sat on the steps of the caravan, the door open behind me, waiting for the sky to say something.
It never did, but the stars showed up anyway. After that, they told me to sell the vehicle. Too many memories. The grief counselor said, "You should start fresh." But how do you start fresh when the only fresh thing in your life had been a man who could sketch your soul in silence? I kept it. I parked it behind Marlene's house when I moved in. I made sure the tires stayed inflated, the oil was checked, the windows sealed. I vacuumed it once a week, dusted the windowsills. I even replaced the tiny curtains he had sewn by hand when the old ones began to fade. They said I was clinging. Maybe I was, but it wasn't just nostalgia. That caravan was my temple, my proof that love existed in quiet places. Every morning I made tea and sat in the passenger seat facing east. Clement always believed the
I watched him sketch for hours, the tremble in his fingers, refusing to obey. But his eyes were so full of stillness. He called it the silent wife. I saw the words penciled in faintly at the top of the page. He never finished it. Not completely. The outline was there. The shadowing was gentle, unfinished. But it was me. Not how I looked in the mirror, but how I existed in his heart. I never showed it to anyone. I did not need to. It was never meant for the world. It was meant for memory. Sometimes Josh would sneak into the caravan when he was younger. He would sit beside me and ask, "Grandpa really drew all these?" pointing at the sketches we had pinned up around the walls. I would nod and he would smile. "He must have loved you a lot." Yes, he did.